Picture this. It's dawn on the Irish coast, 795 AD. Brother Cormac is lighting candles in the monastery when he hears something that chills his blood to the bone. The sound of wooden hulls scraping against stone. Then comes the war cry that would echo across Europe for centuries. Odin's ravens feast today. Within minutes, half his brothers would be dead, and the other half, well, they'd wish they were. But here's what the history books don't tell you about Viking slave raids. The captures weren't random acts of violence. They were calculated military operations with specific targets, precise methods, and devastating efficiency that would make modern special forces envious. What you're about to discover will shatter everything you thought you knew about Viking warfare, because while Hollywood shows us berserkers swinging axes wildly, the reality was far more terrifying. These weren't mindless barbarians. They were strategic predators who turned human trafficking into an art form. And before this video ends, you'll understand exactly why a single Viking longship could paralyze entire kingdoms. The year was 793 AD, when the world first witnessed what would become the most feared sound in medieval Europe, the splash of Viking oars cutting through morning mist. But this wasn't just the beginning of the Viking Age. This was the birth of the most sophisticated slave hunting operation the world had ever seen. The target, Lindisfarne, a holy island off the English coast, packed with defenseless monks and unimaginable treasures. Imagine being Brother Higbold, copying manuscripts in the scriptorium when shadows darken the doorway. These aren't fellow Christians seeking sanctuary. They're warriors whose very presence seems to drain warmth from the air. Their leader steps forward, and you notice something terrifying. He's not looking at the golden chalices or jeweled crosses. He's looking at you, because to him, you're not a holy man, you're inventory. The Vikings had studied this monastery for months. They knew exactly when the tides would allow their shallow draft longships to beach silently. They knew the monks' daily routines, their defenses, or complete lack thereof. They knew that educated clergy could be sold for premium prices in the slave markets of Constantinople. This wasn't a raid, it was a surgical strike. But here's where it gets really chilling. The Vikings didn't just stumble upon the slave trade, they revolutionized it. While other medieval armies captured slaves as a byproduct of conquest, Vikings made human trafficking their primary business model. They developed specialized techniques that would make your skin crawl. And trust me, you need to hear this, because it reveals something profound about human nature itself. Let's talk about their target selection, because this is where Viking intelligence becomes truly sinister. They didn't attack randomly. Archaeological evidence and contemporary accounts reveal they conducted reconnaissance missions months in advance. Picture Viking scouts, posing as traders, walking through Irish villages, mentally cataloguing every able-bodied person they see. They're noting which houses have young women, which men look strongest, even which children might survive the journey to slave markets. Monasteries weren't just chosen for their wealth. They were slave recruitment centers. Monks were literate, making them valuable as scribes and administrators in the Islamic world. But here's the part that'll make your blood run cold. Vikings specifically targeted monasteries during religious festivals when monks from surrounding areas would gather together. One raid could net dozens of educated captives in a single strike. The techniques for capturing men versus women reveal the calculated brutality of Viking operations. For men, Vikings employed what modern military would call shock and awe tactics. They'd strike at dawn when resistance would be minimal, using psychological warfare that was absolutely devastating. Picture this. Vikings would deliberately make as much noise as possible during approach war cries, clashing weapons, even burning buildings, not to announce their presence, but to trigger panic responses that made organized resistance impossible. Archaeological evidence from raid sites shows a disturbing pattern. Male skeletons found at Viking attack sites often show defensive wounds on their arms and hands, suggesting they were overwhelmed while trying to protect others. Vikings would target the strongest men first, either killing them to eliminate resistance or capturing them for sale as laborers. They had perfected techniques for subduing large men, using rope snares and coordinated tackles that modern law enforcement would recognize. But the capture methods for women were even more calculated, and frankly, more disturbing. Vikings understood that women had different value in slave markets, not just as laborers, but as concubines, wives, and domestic servants. This knowledge shaped their entire approach. Rather than the overwhelming force used against men, Vikings employed more subtle psychological manipulation for female captives. Contemporary accounts describe how Vikings would separate women from their families immediately, using family members as leverage to ensure compliance. They'd threaten children to control mothers, threaten mothers to control daughters. It was psychological warfare that exploited the deepest human bonds to ensure cooperation during the often weeks-long journey to slave markets. The ship hunting operations reveal perhaps the most sophisticated aspect of Viking slave raids. Unlike land-based attacks that relied on surprise, ship captures required maritime expertise that bordered on genius. Vikings could identify valuable targets from miles away just by reading sail configurations and hull designs. They knew that certain ship types carried specific human cargo. Merchant vessels often had skilled craftsmen aboard, while pilgrimage ships offered educated, wealthy captives. Picture a merchant vessel sailing peacefully across the North Sea. When crew members spot what looks like a trading ship approaching, the captain orders friendly signals, maybe even prepares to conduct business. Then, at precisely the right moment, when the Viking ship is too close to escape, but their intentions aren't yet clear, the deception drops. Hidden warriors emerge from beneath deck coverings, and what seemed like a peaceful encounter becomes a nightmare in seconds. The Vikings had perfected what we'd now call boarding techniques. They used grappling hooks not just to secure enemy vessels but to prevent escape. They target the steering mechanism first, making the victim ship uncontrollable. Then came the psychological element. Vikings would deliberately keep some crew members alive to spread terror stories, ensuring that future victims would be more likely to surrender without resistance. But here's where the story gets really dark, and this is something most historians won't discuss openly. The Viking slave trade wasn't just about individual captures, it was about systematic depopulation of entire regions. Archaeological evidence suggests that some Irish and Scottish coastal areas were virtually abandoned after repeated Viking raids. We're talking about cultural genocide disguised as economic opportunity. The efficiency was terrifying. A single Viking expedition could depopulate a monastery, capture an entire village's population, and intercept merchant ships, all in one coordinated campaign. They'd return to Scandinavia with hundreds of captives, who would then be sorted like livestock, the educated ones to Constantinople, the strong ones to Muslim Spain, the attractive ones to various courts across Europe. Contemporary accounts describe slave markets in Viking trading centers like Hedeby, where human beings were examined like cattle. Buyers would check teeth, test strength, even assess language skills. The Vikings had essentially industrialized human trafficking, complete with quality control and market segmentation that wouldn't look out of place in a modern business textbook. The psychological impact extended far beyond the immediate victims. Entire populations lived in constant terror of Viking raids. Coastal settlements were abandoned, trade routes were altered. The very fabric of medieval European society was reshaped by the fear of being captured and sold into slavery. Vikings didn't just raid community, they traumatized entire civilizations. But perhaps most disturbing of all is how normalized this became within Viking society. Archaeological evidence from Scandinavian settlements shows that slave ownership was so common that specialized slave quarters were standard architectural features. We're not talking about elite households, even modest Viking families owned human beings captured in raids. The scale becomes clear when you realize that Viking-age Scandinavia simply couldn't sustain its population growth and military expansion without constant influx of slave labor. Every Viking expedition needed to capture slaves just to maintain their society's economic foundation. They had created a civilization that literally could not exist without human trafficking. So what stopped this centuries-long nightmare? The answer reveals something fascinating about medieval power dynamics. It wasn't moral awakening or international pressure. It was economics and military evolution. As European kingdoms developed better defenses and retaliatory capabilities, slave raiding became less profitable and more dangerous. The Vikings didn't stop because they developed consciences. They stopped because the business model became unsustainable. The legacy of Viking slave raids extends far beyond medieval history. These operations represent one of history's most successful human trafficking networks, moving thousands of people across vast distances with industrial efficiency. They pioneered techniques for psychological manipulation, target selection, and logistics that would unfortunately be studied and adapted by later slave traders across multiple continents. Understanding Viking slave raids forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about human nature, economic systems, and how quickly civilized societies can normalize unthinkable cruelty when it becomes profitable. These weren't mindless barbarians acting on impulse. They were organized, intelligent people who built an entire civilization on the systematic exploitation of human suffering. The next time you see a romanticized depiction of Viking culture, remember Brother Cormac lighting those candles at dawn, and the thousands like him whose screams echoed across medieval Europe as they were dragged from everything they knew into lives of bondage. Because that's the real Viking legacy, not just longships and battle axes, but the methodical destruction of human dignity on an industrial scale. What aspects of Viking slave raiding techniques surprised you most? Did this change your perspective on Viking civilization? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and if this historical deep dive opened your eyes to something new, make sure to subscribe for more untold stories that history textbooks won't teach you, because trust me, this is just the beginning of what medieval warfare was really like. And next week, we're diving into something even more shocking. You won't want to miss it.